I was supposed to talk about India's energy targets and its role in the path to net zero by 2070. And over last 2 days, most of the speakers have talked about a bit of it, so I'm running out of ideas. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to reflect on some of the observations and some questions I have by learning from this last 2 days discussion. So that's how I'm going to structure it, and maybe I start with a quick introduction about what's role of energy in India's decarbonization or net zero target, and then point out I have 7 observations slash questions when we think about energy transition. So as we all know that India has pledged to achieve net zero goals by 2070, and as part of the updated NDC, and net zero is not exactly a part of the NDC. It says it's net zero, NDC is up to 2030, and it is towards a net zero target by 2070. So 2070 is still a place. While that's the long-term goal, and the short-term target, which is 2030, it's about, in terms of energy, the specific target is only 50% capacity addition, non-fossil electricity generation capacity addition by 2030. So let me start with an anecdote. Last week I was in a consultation meeting, and in that one of the G7 representatives asked, is India on track to net zero? So my reaction was, okay, we barely set the target now, and considering the 48-year time frame we have for net zero, India can very well plan for fossil assets and use the full life cycle and then achieve net zero. So anyway, so that's about the time frame, but it has been well emphasized over the last 2 days discussion, starting with Mr. Shankar, that energy transition will be the bigger part of India's net zero transformation or transition. So, and under that, as Mr. Shankar pointed out, there are 2 parts. One is electrification of a lot of our energy demand. So even while we are talking about hard to abate sectors and using hydrogen, that also bases on electricity usage. And the second part is a decarbonization of electricity. So that's one part. And then what are our midterm goals to the 2070 target? So the second part, we have particularly 2 developments. One is the NDC commitment. Second is, which is recently launched in the COP27, is the long-term low carbon strategy, which has been developed through consultation with various civil society organizations. It's a good start. It at least identifies the sectors where the intervention need to be, but it's not enough. It doesn't identify midterm targets or the pathway to that net zero. Then let's look at the interim target for electricity sector. So, which I said, India has a global target, which is as part of the NDC, 50% non-fossil capacity. The question is it ambitious enough? So if we talk about non-fossil capacity, as of now, we are little more than 42% non-fossil capacity. And at the rate of capacity addition in energy sector, even if we continue this roughly 15 gigawatt of RE capacity addition, will easily reach that target. And while the other targets lead to much aggressive capacity addition. But then let's look at the various domestic targets. So there are a bunch of domestic targets which India has set for itself, and there are largely 3 parts to it. One is the 450 gigawatt RE. By RE I mean modern RE, which is largely solar and wind and a little bit of small hydro and others. So this target was announced in 2019 in the UN General Assembly by the Prime Minister. So then the next target was announced in 2021 in COP26, which is 500 gigawatt of non-fossil capacity. So both of them are capacity targets, and this has been interpreted very differently by different people. And in fact, in the morning we heard that 50% non-fossil capacity means 409 gigawatt of non-fossil capacity, and which could imply that there could be another 409 gigawatt of fossil capacity. So then the third target is, which is the revised RPO, so which is essentially a generation target, so which says by 2030, the renewable purchase obligation should reach to 43.3% by 2030, and plus there's a 4% storage obligation as well. And a lot of this, and particularly the capacity project targets, are based on CES projection in 2020, in the optimal capacity for 2030 report, where they're talking about 450 gigawatt of RE, and coal is about 267 gigawatt and 25 gigawatt of gas. So if you look at the CA projection, non-fossil capacity is at 64%. So what is puzzling, while India domestically projects and sets target to achieve 64% non-fossil capacity, why is India committing to the world that will only do 50%? And particularly in an area where we are pretty much dependent, as we heard in the conversation so far, we're dependent on external financial investment and also asking for technology transfer. So the question is, when we look at domestic versus global energy targets, the issue is commit less but do more. So generally the intuition should be, we should say that we are doing so much so that you invest or you provide us financial assistance or technology transfer. So that's the larger puzzle about the energy transition towards net zero. Then I, based on this 2 days discussion, I have 7 observations which I wanted to bring into the discussion, and some of this has been raised by many of the speakers, and I'm just trying to rehash that. And the first point is about, is really India doing energy transition? And Mr. Soumya Datta pointed out this. So there's a difference between energy addition and transition. So what India is doing so far is mostly energy addition. We are not displacing any fossil with RE energy. And one example, you can look at the coal power plant retirement. So if you look at the last National Electricity Plan, which was published in 2018, it proposed a retirement plan for 2 5-year tenures. So between 2017 and 2022, they identified some 22.7 gigawatt capacity, thermal capacity, to be retired. And for 2022 to 27 period, they suggested 25.6 gigawatt. So what happened in between the last 5 years, we only retired 10 gigawatt of capacity. And the updated electricity plan, which is still in a draft stage in 2022, talks that over next 5 years, we are only going to retire 4.66 gigawatt, not the 26 gigawatt as earlier identified. So basically the signal is we are going to hold on to our thermal capacity for a little more. We are not going to retire them as fast as we are planning, like 5-6 years back. So probably that's right. I mean, in fact, Ajit showed that slide when he was comparing multiple projections for 2040. So, and in fact, all the projections point to that India will be somewhere between 200 to 250 gigawatt of coal capacity. Not just CA, other than NREL, which is a little aggressive on the RE side, which talks about below 200 gigawatt coal capacity. But most studies are pointing to 200 plus gigawatt of coal capacity usage in India. So if that's the point, and then the other aspect is, as it has been pointed out, India's energy demand is going to quadruple over next 2 decades. So it's fair enough to say that we do energy addition where we only add cleaner energy for our new demands. And while the existing demand, or this portion could be still dependent on fossil. Then the second level point here is, if we are doing so, if we are going to hold on to 200 to 250 gigawatt of thermal capacity, why not think about realigning those resources? I mean, there's significant amount of efficiency can be achieved there. So think about the transportation from coal pithead to thermal plants elsewhere. Can we look for more pithead kind of generation, but with more strict environmental norms and more sort of pollution control norms, and try to achieve and maybe use newer technology to reduce emissions and achieve better output there. So that's my first point. Now going to the second point, all these clean energy targets we are talking about, these are largely national targets. And it was again pointed out in one of the presentations that a bulk of the existing 120 gigawatt RE is located in 5 to 6 states. So it's not happening in all the 30 states. So how do we translate these ambitious RE targets into state level action? So what does it require? So there has been policy instruments which helps, and which Mr. Rao keeps pointing out. Policy also induces inefficiencies. So let's talk about this ISTS charge waiver. So which is pretty useful. Okay, RE is a new technology and we all want clean energy. So let's give that waiver. But that waiver is also in a way promoting this kind of concentrated RE development. So, we know that, for example, solar cost would be cheaper on the western side, particularly in Rajasthan, Gujarat, compared to the eastern belt. So, because of the ISTS charge, so why, much of the capacity coming on that side, because wherever you build, you are not paying on the transmission cost. You only pay for the 3% loss in interstate transmission. So, while this is helpful, we also have to think how much we can extend this, how much we can continue this. So, is it going to address on the regional diversity aspect? So, or are we ready for this regionally concentrated development? Then the third point I wanted to point out, which was raised, whether we want our new energy resources in a centralized way, which is a follow-up, or we look for more decentralized energy resources. When the 100 gigawatt solar target was announced, there was like a 60-40 ratio, which said that 60% will be grid scale or centralized, 40% will be off-grid. So there was some thought there. Why that hasn't happened? So if you look at solar rooftop particularly, has been cost competitive for last 6 years. So it's cost competitive for not just the CNI consumers, it's also cost competitive for residential consumers who are consuming above 300 units. So why is this not increasing? We need to find out answers for that. Why rooftop solar is not expanding when it's already cost competitive? So, and also we have market mechanisms to draw private finance. It's not like the household has to invest that. So in an ideal world, we have funding for that. Then fourth and related point is our energy transition conversation has been so much supply side focused. So much of capacity addition, but we are kind of ignoring the demand side completely, where the potential is huge. You can shift the demand to daytime when your solar power generates. And we talk about agriculture. Kusum has been there, but there hasn't been much of progress also. Even the scheme has been there, the politics and economics is quite aligned there. So, but why it's not working out? So we talk about how expensive is grid integration of RE, but there's a cheaper option of demand balancing also. So you can shift the demand to daytime so that your balancing cost reduces for at least initial 30-40% of electricity. So why aren't we tapping that? So I have 3 more points. I'll be quick. So 3 minutes. The third point is mobilization. We need a lot of financing for this energy transition, and over last 2 days we spoke about how much of private capital opening up, not just domestically but also globally. But we also have to think about how this capital is mobilized. If all this capital in finance is debt finance, then it has a cost implication. So in fact, there are early studies which are pointing that if India has to mobilize all the decarbonization cost domestically, which is either through taxes or through debt financing, then the purchasing power of may come down by 2050. So if you're sort of decarbonizing the sector by then. So we also have to look at that side. The other related side is the public finance story. So as of now, fossil fuel contributes about 3.2% of national GDP. So this is petroleum, tax on petroleum and coal sources. So even in an energy addition scenario, we might not be reducing this revenue, but the growth is stagnated. Over last 2 decades, grew many folds, and we are sort of seeing a plateau now. So in that context, we are also at the same time talking about how much viability gap funding required for buses and other sectors. So where will that money come? One end, we expect the state to put in money into the energy transition. On the other end, the fiscal space is shrinking. Then one related point is about the private investment. We saw a slide yesterday how the fossil companies are diversifying into renewable energy or cleaner energy. While that's a optimistic story, there's also a side which we should be concerned about. And there was particularly a slide on the Indian private sector where we saw three companies with their places, about particularly NTPC, Adani and Ambani. If you add up their place for next 10 years, they're probably capturing the whole national target for India. So are we moving towards, it's not a shift of risk, it's a shift of control also. Are we moving towards a oligopoly? So that's something we have to think about. Then the two more minutes.
1 minute.
2 minutes. So the sixth point is about transition in the energy access. So we may be complacent with the household access to grid, but there is a significant transition to happen in energy access, and particularly at the rural level. So, so far our attention has been much more on how do we recover the cost, but we haven't talked about how to make the citizens capable of paying for energy services. So there should be while we think of energy transition, there's an opportunity, there's a moment to think about how can we shift the energy access conversation around ability to pay. Can access to energy be an instrument or input to generating economic activity so that households can pay? And the final point I wanted to bring in was, and this again draws from the discussion over 2 days, I see there are several symptoms which was pointed out in this discussion, and which is, one is the emerging conflict situation where when a solar park is built, whether it's the farmland taken or the forest land taken for RE or water bodies taken for deployment. So there's a conflict situation arising between the people dependent on natural resources and the transition happening. The second kind of issue arising is the fragile local development. When a solar park develops, you suddenly see an increase in economic activity, road construction happening, people coming in and economic activity booming. But that's very short-lived and it's gone in 2 years' time. We also spoke about the financial bubble.
I would request you now to just sum
up. Financial bubble, these are all symptoms of a resource curse. So are we, if the clean energy transition also heading towards a resource curse? I'll stop there.
Thank you.